Now I am happy to introduce our speaker today, Lucy Welsted. As many of you may know, this is our first speaker in our series where we have a school leader who is going to discuss one very important issue that is always a challenge, and even more so in a school that has more than one language, so that your ideal candidate not only has to have, the training required and the human characteristics that you need for your team, but also has to speak a certain language. And Lucy is the founder and director of Montessori Córdoba International School, which was founded in 2013. And then they moved in 2019 to their current campus, which was where we were hosted in March, this beautiful building and campus where they have an infant community, children's houses, lower elementary and upper elementary. So welcome, Lucy. We're very much looking forward to see what insights you've learned over the years that you've been doing this work. And thank you for agreeing to share with us and everyone who's joined us.
Thanks for that lovely introduction. Yes, nice to see everybody, as I said at the beginning. This talk is primarily directed at other school leaders who are normally the people in charge of making hiring decisions. But I understand as well that it might involve other people in the school community. And also, just before I bring up my presentation, to say that this is very much written from my own experience, but I understand that experiences may be very varied around the world as well. But I hope that there are things that can help many different types of schools around the world. I'll just share my presentation. So I thought I'd start at the beginning, which is for most people, especially founders of projects, maybe not all school leaders who may have gone into a school that's already set up. But for me, as a school founder, I was starting really from scratch, which is normally some kind of vision to open a Montessori environment in your local community, often also related to being able to have your own children attend that school. And normally you have very little money and very few contacts. So that means that the first person that you hire is really, it's quite a nerve-wracking experience. As actually every first time is nerve-wracking. So the first time you sign the lease on somewhere, the first time. But I was fortunate myself in that my father was a school leader in England. So I did have a helping hand because he could tell me how you go around hiring teachers, at least from his point of view. Now, I started off with very little idea of what to do. And I still remember the conversation I had with him about professional development plans. And I guess I was lucky in that sense that I did have that mentor of somebody that had many years of experience to help me get started. So let's have a look. My slide's not changing. I wonder why. There. So I recognize that when we first start a new project, we're very much juggling, because often as the school leader, we're also in the classroom. We normally have very few children, so we don't have the financial resources to be able to have maybe someone on reception, someone in the classroom. In fact, some people I know even clean when they first start their projects and really do everything. When I first started, I didn't have a big financial cushion. So I knew that I needed to maybe start a few different programs in parallel, because if I just started an early infancy Montessori community and only 5 children signed up, I wouldn't be able to pay the overheads. So I did actually decide to run parallel language classes in the afternoon. So I didn't only have to hire people for the Montessori infant community program, which was the first one that I opened. I had to hire people for the language school as well. But in the end, that was actually quite useful because it helped me be more creative in how to distribute the staff, or maybe, you know, if you've just got the need for a part-time member of staff, then they could also teach some language lessons after school, which meant that they could have full-time contracts. So whilst for a school that is sort of further down the line, I wouldn't necessarily recommend trying to complicate things with extra activities like that. I think for a start in school, it can help, especially when, as often is in bilingual programs, we want to attract people to come and work for us from other countries. The reality is that these people often won't come over for a part-time contract, so they need to have full-time work, and that can help play around a little bit. So yeah, at stage 1, we're definitely juggling. So I think when we're looking for our first members of staff, there's a few steps that are very important, because bear in mind, you're asking somebody to trust you enough to come and work for you, sometimes to up and move to a different country to come and work for you, but you have no reputation yet. So any kind of additional work that you can do to make sure that the hiring process is professional, that it goes smoothly, and also to connect with the people that might be interested in the positions, is really important. I mean, that's always important, but it's something that you can do at the start when you don't have your school's reputation to fall back onto. So as a first step, I would definitely recommend investigating how to advertise for international staff. Now, I remember when I first started, you know, my father said to me, well, we advertise in the Times educational supplement in England. So I said, okay, I'm going to investigate that. And it costs thousands of pounds. So that was definitely not an option for me. And bear in mind that although the internet, you know, was obviously around to support us, there are more and more Montessori support groups all the time. From what I can see now, it's relatively easy to advertise for Montessori guides. There's the great what's it called? Montessori educators from around the world, is it? The one that MIP set that up, didn't they? Yeah. So that's like I see it on Facebook, but I think there might be on other types of social media. And then now there are local Montessori associations often have spaces on their website where you can advertise for staff as well. I've advertised for staff that aren't that don't need Montessori qualifications, they're administration staff, through local networks. And I always have the openings up on my school website as well. So I think compared to 10 years ago, it's easier now to get the offer out there and make sure that people hear about it.
No, I'll just second that. I mean, it seems funny to say, you know, because obviously, like you said, there was internet, but there just wasn't the reach and the number of resources. And yeah, it's just really, the capacity has grown tremendously.
Yeah, I think schools are fortunate now compared to how I felt back then.
Mm.
But there's always a way. Just you need to investigate and bear your budget in mind, obviously, while you're investigating. But it's definitely worth paying or trying to budget for a small amount to invest in advertising. And also to bear in mind that if you want an AMI trained guide and you advertise on the AMI website, well, that helps guides to understand that you're a school that's serious about wanting a AMI trained guide and that you're serious about Montessori. So that's definitely worth looking into as well. Another thing that I think is very important is to research thoroughly local requirements for employment and ethical requirements. So obviously that's about equal opportunities and things which should probably come naturally, but just in case, make sure that you have it set out somewhere and that at every stage of the process, you're going to respect the time that that person's investing in applying for a position at your school. The local requirements may include needing a visa if you're from a different country. And it's not always simple. In Spain, it's definitely not simple, and it varies from regional government to regional government. So whilst I know, for example, that other schools fairly nearby have managed to get visas for people to work in Spain from outside the European Union. In Córdoba, I tried twice and spent quite a lot of money on immigration lawyers and things like that. And I was rejected. So I've had to be extra creative because I couldn't choose from anybody outside the European Union even. Now, previously, at least that included English speakers from Britain, like myself. But now it doesn't even include English speakers from Britain, which is probably a plus in favour for all those fantastic English speakers from around Europe who I think maybe often felt that there was a bit of discrimination against them for not being native as often as happens. Now, I understand that adds an extra layer of complication. So further down the line, I'm going to talk about what my strategy has been to overcome these barriers. Okay, yeah, so that's like the laws for hiring international staff as well. That's what I was mentioning. Then what's very important is to make a list of all the benefits you can offer. At this stage, I think it's safe to say that having a new program often means that you're trying to employ somebody to even create a new environment, which is an extra workload. And it is true that a lot of the most experienced staff members, or let's say Montessori guides or language specialists, maybe might not want to go back to working in a new program. So that's where you have to really try and think of all the benefits you can offer, and they might not even be financially competitive in the first stages of your new project. So it
So,
helps to brainstorm.
yeah, Lucy, could you just maybe give us an example of, maybe what you were able to offer in the early years, and then if it's changed, what you can offer now that might be different, to give us an idea?
Yeah, I think what I made sure to get over in the first interviews I did was my enthusiasm and passion for the project. I remember in the first interviews, I remember even I was interviewing somebody via video conference, and I walked them around the place I'd rented that I was setting up, because and I just really transmitted how I felt about this new project, and I think that that helped. And then other benefits, I think more than anything, just communicating that you're very serious about what you're doing, that it is the first step, but that you'll be doing it together with them, that then definitely not going to be on their own. And then as far as the other benefits are concerned, there's the benefits of the local area, which is the next step. So when we're looking at hiring staff that aren't from the local area, when somebody's looking for a job in another country, and I know this because I did the same thing. I I got a job in Cordoba in 2002, and went through the interview, to be a teacher. And I'd never been to Cordoba before. I didn't really mind where I was going, sort of like anywhere on the Mediterranean, I thought, because it was only going to be for a year, so it didn't matter. 20 years later, I'm still here. But I remember that the feeling that I got from the person that interviewed me was very important. And then also the place. So I Googled Cordoba and I thought, oh yeah, okay, it has a university. It's a beautiful place. It's historical. So we really need to sell what our local area can offer, because a person isn't only choosing the position at this stage, they're also choosing where they're going to live. So have a good think about that. For example, one thing I always mention, and it's not always obvious, especially to people from Cordoba, is how safe Cordoba is. Because I know that's really reassuring. Now, maybe that's not the case where you're from, but it will have something else. And it does help that I went through that same experience of coming to live in a different country without knowing anybody, or I didn't even know Spanish at that time. So if you're a bit short of ideas, maybe try and meet up with somebody who has gone through that experience, who has moved to your local area, and ask them, what did you find charming or interesting about this place when you first arrived? And then you can make that a benefit of the position you're offering.
Yep.
Right, the job description. Now, I actually have this on my next slide. So I'll show you an example of a job description from my school. As in all the documents I'm going to share with you today, these are documents that have evolved over time. And I do remember when it was just a few lines, and now it's almost 3 pages. You just keep thinking of things and adding things as you get more experience. But if you can be as concrete as possible about what people's responsibilities are going to be, then there's no gray areas in their decision. And it also means that when they arrive, they're getting what they expected. So whilst we have to be positive about what we can offer, we also have to be realistic.
Right. Yeah, you don't do yourself a favor if
No, not in the long run.
oversell or
No. I can understand it could be tempting.
Yeah, right.
But no, it's best to be honest. So I'm going to jump to, so here's one of our job descriptions. And if anybody wants, I do recommend schools always to create their own documents, because then it is authentic. It is from your school. But if anyone here wants to see any documents, then you can, I'm happy to send them to you afterwards as inspiration. In fact, obviously I was inspired by other documents when I first started these as well. So here we have a job description for a children's house lead guide. Personalize the job description so they know it's referring to them. Be specific about the salary and the benefits as well. I think that's very important. And then I have different sections. There's a general statement about the purpose of the job. Then here, I don't know if you can see, it's very small. A very specific outline of duties and responsibilities, which includes educational strategies, care and well-being of the children, school environment, assessment and communication of children's development and progress, and then general aspects of their role, such as consistently being a positively consistent role model to the children in the school. All right, I'll just move this. Then the time commitment. This is also very important. It's very specific. Say from what date to what date their contract will be from, what type of contract it is. In this case, it was a temporary one, I think, to cover maternity leave. Be specific about the holidays, the conditions, the working hours. The more exact you can be with this, the better. And how much planning time they might have, or how much meeting time. And then here we've got this standard statement was something that my father recommended I put on when I first started. This is from a head teacher from a traditional school in England. He said, you've got to have the standard statement on the end. And I said, what's that? Well, this is what it is. The duties and responsibilities are neither exclusive nor exhaustive. So it's like a just in case, just in case anything else should come up. And it's reasonable. It could also be considered as part of your role.
Right.
Let me see if I can go back now. Yeah. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Okay. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, but also don't string people along. So it's a difficult balance because especially when we hire international staff, it's more likely for them to drop out at some time between the start of the hiring process and them arriving at the school to work. So what you need to do is be open-minded. You may not have a lot of CVs. You may be disappointed with the CVs you have because none of them fall in line with the profile you were looking for. In fact, we'll talk a bit more about that later on. But at the same time as you need to be respectful in that you say to people, okay, we start, for example, I would say, we're receiving applications now. So when you receive a CV or an application, you say, thank you. We're going to be considering these applications from this date to this date, which is in the future. So you can give yourself time and they know what's happening with their application. It's also good manners to reply to people who've sent you an application that aren't going to be successful in that process. Although I have to admit that there have been times when I've been teaching in the classroom, leading the school, doing everything, when I haven't done that. So it does happen. And sometimes it's just because of the sheer volume. It's even now, we now receive CVs nearly every day. And sometimes we have a standard reply that we send to people, but sometimes it slips through the net if we have hundreds of messages in our inbox. But do try, especially if it's somebody that's in the process that you've already communicated with. Then I think it's very important to keep them informed of at what stage they're at in the selection process. And that also means that if they are in the end a successful candidate or one of the candidates that you'd like to choose, they know that they're going to be treated in a professional way and a respectful way in the school. So these details are important. If you are trying to decide between a few candidates, and maybe you've interviewed a few of them, it's also quite difficult sometimes because you want to offer the position to somebody, give them time to think about whether they really want to take the position, and all this time the other candidates are waiting. Now, I always tell everybody involved what's happening. So I'll, if we do the interviews, I'll say, right, we'll be back within 2 weeks. But really, the first person that I've chosen, I'm contacting the next day. So they have a week to think, and the others don't feel sort of left up in the air.
And Lucy, maybe you could go into a little more detail specifically about when, because I think for a lot of schools that have more than one language, it comes down to hiring people who aren't from the local community, because you might not have enough people who, in your case, speak English. Can you talk a little bit about kind of, do you offer any extras to people who are moving to Córdoba from abroad, or is there any kind of incentive for someone who might be relocating from another part of Spain or from another country?
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, I haven't had to hire somebody from a different country for a long time.
Okay.
We have quite a solid team at the moment. And actually, back when I did hire people that moved from other countries, the financial situation was pretty bad. So I couldn't offer a relocation allowance. But I did talk about it with them. I did say, I understand that we can't offer a relocation allowance. But we can offer all these many things, and then the list of benefits.
Right.
What I did do, though, is I often paid for people to come for in-person interviews.
Okay.
If it was realistic. So, for example, I could never really afford to pay for somebody to come from the States to Europe, but I could pay for somebody to catch a flight from England to Spain, and pay for them to stay in a hotel,
Okay.
to be involved in an in-person interview, and train fares as well. I would normally have that as the second phase, though. So I'd do an online interview first, and then as a second phase, ask them to come in person. So that's definitely worth investing in if possible. I was going to mention that further down the line. And other than that, I think sharing the fact that I'd had the same experience as them, that I was going to be with them. It's like I mentioned later on as well, sort of going above and beyond, supporting people, because sometimes people come and they don't even know the language, the local language, and they need help with everything. I mean, I've connected internet lines, connected telephones. I've found, at one point, I remember saying to my husband, I feel like an estate agent. I know all the available flats in the Cordoba area. I know all the estate agents, helping them to open bank accounts, helping them to, and this was spending a lot of time with them and sort of mothering them in a way, I guess, because that's what they needed.
So you did get involved in helping people find places to live, and
yes,
I think that's an important thing to note as well.
Yes, and I would be clear about that as well at the interview stage, because that can be so daunting. I mean, to be honest, recently, I think I remember the last person that came from a different country, I said, I'll help you find a flat, and they were like, I've already found one online. So these days, it's also, people can sign up for flats a lot more easily than they could before. But as long as they know that if they want to look around, you'll be there. I think that's important. I also paid for some people's deposit as well on a new flat when
Oh,
they needed it. Yeah.
that's interesting.
And I went a little bit further there.
Mm,
So in terms of being creative, what I meant was what I mentioned earlier. So if you financially can't afford, for example, to have a guide in every classroom, and you need to divide a guide between 2 classrooms because there's very few children, or all these situations that can come up, you need to be creative and think how this person can make up the time to have a full-time contract. I have managed to find a few local people that wanted part-time work, and I do know other schools have actually had success with that. Often people who've just maybe started a family or are looking for something part-time. But other than that, it can be quite difficult to get international staff without a full-time contract. So maybe you're feeling overwhelmed in administration, and you could do with some help, and you need someone that can be a guide in the classroom during the work cycle. But then, as was our case, for example, we had a half-day program, so nearly all of the children went home at 1. So then in the afternoon, they could help us do something else. But again, this should never be a surprise. It always needs to be planned beforehand, and they need to know exactly what they're signing up for. So it needs to be very clear. And if necessary, there needs to be two job descriptions. And I even had separate job contracts for people that worked in, for example, the infant community and gave language classes. So they could see that it was very much 2 separate roles with 2 separate objectives. So remember, it's matchmaking. I think I've already made that clear. They're choosing you as much as you're choosing them. So as I said, be honest and authentic. I think people can sense this anyway. If you're trying to bluff or cover up or not be clear about something, it's just going to put a good candidate off. So it's better to be honest, but also be prepared and be professional. Right, let's have a look. So that was the job description we looked at. Okay, some things to be careful with. Now, notice I said be careful with, but I didn't say don't, because these things don't always mean that it's not going to go well, but you need to be extra cautious. And I think in projects like the usual Montessori school projects, which start small, these things are often things that come up and are very tempting, because you often feel very lonely as well when you first start. I'm looking at hiring friends there. So it seems like a great idea not to go alone. But all these things have pitfalls that you really need to think about. So accepting financing of your project in exchange for work or the expectation of work. I had this situation come up. Somebody offered me quite an important sum of money in exchange for a role as a Montessori guide. This was somebody who was based in Córdoba and wanted to be with their family, but there were no other Montessori schools in Córdoba. So we had that situation, a Montessori guide in Córdoba who really, really wants the job. But it just didn't feel like the right thing to do, because I didn't know what this person was like working.
I'm sorry, I just need to clarify. You're saying that they were offering to give money to invest in the school in exchange for a job?
Yes. Maybe that's a very strange situation.
I've never heard of that. That's very interesting, but it's good to just put things out there that can happen. Yeah, I mean, all kinds of things can happen. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's tempting, obviously, when you really don't have the money to get going, but it just felt like too much of a commitment to something that I wasn't sure about. And I could just anticipate so many ways that could go terribly wrong in the future.
Yeah.
And it's similar with hiring friends, you know. What you don't want to do is end up not being friends. But that isn't to say that this doesn't work. To be honest, in my team, and there's 18 of us, 2 members of my team were friends of mine before they started at the school. But we both of us, all of us, we did think about it a lot, and we were very honest about where it could go, how things could go wrong, how it could affect our friendship. And fortunately, it's gone really well, but that doesn't mean that it always will. So yeah, I definitely recommend having a good think and a good talk before you get into something like that.
And what about parents? Because parents, I think for Montessori schools, it's very common because we tend to have small communities where everyone knows each other. And parents, as they get involved in the school, sometimes maybe one of them loses a job and they start thinking, oh, well, I could help the school in this way and it would help me as well. Or can you share?
Absolutely. And that's absolutely what I've done as well. So I'm not saying don't hire parents. I'm just saying think very, very carefully about hiring parents. There was a parent that I approached because I saw potential, and that's actually gone really well. Another parent who, like you said, they were in financial difficulty. I'd already known them for a few years. It wasn't somebody new. And so they came in to do some work on on sports for a while. And this brings us on to, yeah, that's it. But I think the most potential difficulty with hiring parents is we have to think about the children. So what happens if that working relationship doesn't work out for the child? Well, how is it going to affect the child? And very importantly, how is this parent going to manage having their child in the school where they work? Now, I know different schools have different policies on this, but I'm completely in favor of, personally, free tuition for staff children. For me, it's because I think that I can just imagine that if you were a passionate Montessori educator, but you couldn't afford to have your own child in the school, that would really be something divisive within yourself. So I think that we welcome with open arms children of staff, but I've also had an experience of hiring someone who was very anxious about their child, everywhere, not just in our school, an anxious parent, and they weren't able to respect maybe the limit between being at work and being a mom of the child.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I mean, then you have to do a lot of work around that because, and what the child's expectation should be, what the parent's expectation should be.
Exactly.
Very tricky.
Exactly. It can be tricky. And that brings us on to the next one, which is giving child places in exchange for work. So I've never done this. What I have done, that I mentioned before, when a parent got into trouble and I knew that they could be positive for our team during a time, but I did insist that there were 2 separate transactions. I will pay you for your job and you will pay for your child's place. Not they call it in Spanish a trueque, but I can't even think of the word in English now.
Barter.
A barter, yeah. I think that just helps clarify the situation and the transaction. And the problem is that if you have someone working for you, and then maybe you don't need that member of staff, it doesn't necessarily mean that the relationship hasn't worked out. It could just mean that you're changing the program, or the program gets smaller. And then that person can't afford to have the child in your school. How do you tell someone they no longer have a position and their child also has to move to a different school? That is a very, very difficult situation to be in if you love the children, which I'm guessing you do. So that's why I think it's important to think a lot about those situations.
Yeah.
And the last one, which seems obvious, but I know that lots of people don't follow up references. I know this because I've had people move on to different places and I've never been asked for a reference. I have been asked for references, but not always. And
so in what form do you ask for references? Because this was something that I kind of went through different phases with. So I'm curious to hear.
yeah. I started off asking for a written reference, and I developed a form that I thought with tick boxes that I thought might be quicker, because some people are reluctant to spend the time to fill out a reference.
Well, it can take a while to draft a letter, really.
Exactly.
And sometimes when it's a letter, I found that it was too generic. It didn't really give me the kind
That's
of
it.
subtle
That's it.
information I might want about the person.
In
So,
terms, so mine does have very specific questions, like you know, what I'm trying to remember. I could have showed it you, but what is this person's relationship like with children? You know, what is this how does this person relate to other adults in the school? Would you re-employ this person? It's a good one. And tick boxes do help, and you can get more information. I've given up. I've given follow-up phone calls only when there's been something that's concerned me on the the form that I've received. Because I think, you know, most people know that if something's not marked quite high up, there's maybe a problem, and then it's a good time maybe to call and find out what that problem is. But references also, this might be a bit controversial, don't have to be the be all and end all. I'm talking about one person I hired to work in the language school, not in the Montessori school, who was given such a bad reference that I decided to call up the person involved, the person that gave me the reference, and this person sounded very unstable. So I decided to get back to the candidate, who was a candidate that I'd actually really connected with. And I said to them, you know, I don't think I'm going to offer you this post because of the reference. And then she told me about the relationship she'd had with her previous employer. And I hired her, and she was great for years and years and years and years. You know, until I closed the language school, she worked for me. So sometimes, you know, people can have bad experiences in previous employments that are not necessarily because they're not going to be good working with you. So yeah.
Lucy, I'm just aware of the time now, and I want to make sure we have time for questions. So I don't.
Oh yes, yeah. I always take too long. I'm going to go faster.
No, I just want to make sure there's time for the questions.
Okay. Right, let's move on. Okay. So what someone can offer, reading a CV and a cover letter. This is just a quick thing because I really think people probably understand this. But as I said before, it will be common, especially when you're starting a new project, for people not to have all the requirements you have for the role. So you need to think about where you can give and adapt to people's profiles. Maybe you would love an AMI trained guide, but you don't have an application from one. Or maybe you interview an AMI trained guide and you interview a guide that's done a different type of qualification, and actually you really connect to that person. So, or they have those human qualities that Marika mentioned before that are also important. So you need to decide what you can prioritize and what you can let go in your list of requirements. Value non-related experience. It's if somebody's had varied experiences in their life, that can all contribute to what they have to offer the school. Diversity of interests. I like to ask people, everybody puts their interest on the CV and you kind of don't look at it, but at the interview stage I definitely like to find out what people are passionate about. And then a logical career path. That doesn't necessarily mean that they've worked at one school for 3 years and another school for 3 years. It doesn't have to be that. Maybe somebody's been traveling around the world, so they've worked in a cafeteria in Australia for 6 months, and then that is also logical within what they were doing. What isn't logical maybe is living in one city and working in a different school every 3 months. That kind of thing kind of makes me think, I need to find out more about what might have happened here. Right, let's move on. The interview stage. So interviews at work. One thing I started doing was sending questions beforehand. I think it's great for people to be well prepared for the interview. That way you can get more out of the conversation. You can get deeper into, what they think, what they believe in, what's really important to them. I haven't always done it though.
What kind of questions were on your list? Do you remember off the top of your head? That's not anything I ever did.
Yeah, things like what made you decide to work in children's education, or what is it you love about Montessori? And then there were more specific things like, let me think, tell me, if we're talking about people with experience, then it might be something like, tell me how you deal with a new child, how do you deal with the normalization process for a new child entering into your environment? Or how do you communicate an incident where a child's been hurt to their parents? What I'd call fairly typical interview questions, I think, but
Okay, so I didn't know if you meant something like more creative, but you're just thinking more straightforward.
Yeah, and well, I did actually. I think I mentioned it, or I was going to mention it later on, about asking people to do more creative things. Wait a minute, see if I've got it put down here. Oh yeah, I remember. Well, work hard on your questions is think a lot about what you want to know. Don't just go in the interview without any questions planned, to see where the conversation goes. No, have questions.
I know that some school leaders I've spoken to are very methodical about making sure they ask the candidates for a particular job the same questions. That's something that you've done?
Yes. In fact, that's it. Have a notation system. So I think maybe it's on the next slide, actually. Yeah, here. So here's an interview, an interview for a post. So this is where every candidate has the same questions. At the beginning of the interview, I always state what we're interviewing for, what the post's for, and run again over the conditions of employment. So we all know what we're talking about, just to make sure. Then I have this notation system, which I wouldn't tell them about, or if I'm interviewing them in person, I try to hide it from them, because obviously it's like giving people marks and you don't want them to know about that. But I find that sometimes conversations can be so complex that trying to make notes means that you aren't when you look back at your notes and you're maybe comparing different candidates, you haven't made notes about the same thing. So I have kind of this scale, which is how much their answer impacted on me. And that's just, but then I also scribble all over this paper, with extra things that come up. But then with the different candidates, I do have ways of comparing how they went through the interview process. I also know schools that do sort of interviews by specialists who know how to do what do you call it, like when they do kind of psychological tests, or the Myers-Briggs tests to find out what type of person or character they have. I haven't found it necessary to do that myself, but I'm not saying it might be it might be a good addition if you have that available.
Right.
So to go back, right. Organize well. This is a bit what I mentioned before about making it very clear when the interview is, when you're going to get back in touch with them, if you will be inviting some people for a second round of interviews, or if you'll be inviting them to come to the school in person. So set out a timeline and share it with the candidates. Then what I mean by design an interview procedure with a profile in mind is it doesn't have to be the same procedure for every role in your school. For example, when I wanted to hire a language specialist, a Spanish language specialist from the local area who weren't going to be Montessori qualified, what I really wanted to find out was whether they had some notion of sort of integrated education or respectful education. But I knew that all of the candidates had read about Montessori before the interview or before the sending in their application form. So they could kind of talk, but I wanted to know if they could walk the walk. So in that case, I asked them to design a workshop around a specific theme. And I gave the specifics, so that it was going to be a multi-age grouping, that these were the objectives, that then the children would be left with some follow-up work. I didn't explain it in Montessori terms because I knew that they didn't have experience of that, but in general educational terms, I could ask them to create something. And they did that, and it was really, really useful in getting an insight into who already had a feel for the way we worked. And then from those candidates, I asked a few of them to come in and actually deliver that to the children, and then I could observe them working. And that is one of the wonderful things about hiring people from the local area, which you can really get them more involved and get to know them a bit better. Whereas when we're hiring international candidates, often we can't go that far. But if you can, because the school has the finances to get them over, then get them over and do that. It's definitely helpful. Right, consider involving work teams at later stage interviews. So if you're looking for an assistant, get the guide into the last round of interviews. In the end, it's going to be their working partner, so that's a good idea. And you can even delegate. In fact, my business manager, 2 years ago, we were hiring a new receptionist, and then by that stage, I already knew that she was capable, although it was going to be her first time of hiring someone herself and going through the interviews herself. She did a very good job.
So,
yeah. Who?
Go ahead. Do you have I'm sorry, do you have another slide or?
Yeah, there's a couple more slides. Do you want me to continue?
Well, maybe we can look at some of the questions,
Yeah,
because
sure.
maybe some of what you had prepared is in,
The questions. Okay.
questions. So let me just take a look and see what people are wondering about.
Yeah.
So, um, so someone is asking about sites where someone looking for a job or considering a job in your school might read about you in your school beforehand. Is that something that's been a factor for you, especially for someone who might be considering relocating?
Yes, I think, do you mean have I received CVs on spec, we say? Yeah, definitely.
And
I've
also,
received, yeah,
go ahead.
I've received CVs like that. And I actually have somebody working here that was relocating, that was a Montessori guide.
Lucy, can you stop sharing so then
Yeah.
we can see everyone more easily? Thanks. So, okay. And so someone else asked, saying that they've sent emails to references of teachers that I want to hire, but sometimes they don't reply. What do you do in this case?
Well, do you know, that hasn't happened to me. I wonder how you write in your email. What I do is I personalize the email, and I give options to complete the form or send me something that they've already got, or if they would prefer me to make a phone call, so to give them various options.
Right, but then
And
if the former employer in this case
just
doesn't,
doesn't.
I mean, I would,
I'd write a few times and then I'd call. And then if I still had no luck, then I'd ask for another reference from that person.
yeah, I would let the candidate know so they can
Mm.
either remind that person or give you a different
Yeah.
reference.
In fact,
Yeah.
normally at the point where I ask the candidate for their references, I do ask the candidate to get in touch with their referee
Yeah,
before I get in
of
touch with
course,
them. Yeah.
of course, yeah. So, in your school, do you have any kind of training or orientation for the local Montessori teachers who are new to working with a bilingual teacher guide? So I think the question is kind of onboarding and how does everyone know what to expect?
Yeah. Yeah, well, first I get people in to observe in the classrooms. If someone's starting at the start of the year, then we have our training week before school starts. So they're involved in lots of training sessions. Then I also give them maybe some individual sessions about specific beginner things. I think the most important thing at this phase, like I said, when I first started, it was very personal. But now what I do is I assign them a mentor. So it's normally another guide working on their level, if possible. And the staff handbook is really important. So my staff handbook started off as 2 pages, and now it's like a novel. It's really, really, really long and detailed.
But do people actually read it?
What it's a bit like the parents' handbook, isn't it? It's there, and if you have any doubts, you can refer to it. I think the new staff do read it. It's very well organized, so you've got different sections, and it's easy to go to the page that you're looking for. And another thing I put in there a few years ago, which was good, was what I call an orientation checklist. So it's like a checklist of things to help them when when your first day is coming up, and just so that they can check off that they've done all the most important things they need to do before they start. Because obviously if you give them all the school policies, it's too much for someone new to take in. I also in the orientation of new staff, I make it very clear that we are aware that they have a settling in period. So I'm not going to ask them to fulfill all the roles that they're necessarily going to have to fulfill in time. So little by little, just like a child as well, little by little.
And in general, someone asked, how long do bilingual teachers stay in your school?
Since I started with my, I have a policy called finding and training local talent. Since then, I've developed a very stable team. Some of my staff members have been here for a long time, and in fact, there's some people that came over and then met life partners in the local area and then stayed. But one thing you have to be at peace with is that some people will come and go, and that's okay. It's their life path and you need to support them. Sometimes I've had amazing people go on to do other things, but I always just wish them all the best and, you know, send them off with a lot of love. And in fact, sometimes they even come back, which happened once. Someone went away from a year and came back. So yeah.
Have you ever had a guide, hire a guide who doesn't speak Spanish, the local language?
Yes.
And how has that gone?
Well, I think they need support. I've always put them in classrooms with somebody who does speak the local language and also speaks English. So then they haven't been alone in a classroom developing those relationships with parents without being able to understand the local language. There's been another person or myself. And what I talked about earlier about really helping them with all aspects of settling in to the new environment, it's important. In fact, you can develop a transitioning, settling in plan, and you can share it with them so they can see exactly where they're going to be supported, who their mentor is, who they can call, at what time of the day they can call. You know, I've had people calling me on Sunday night asking me how to go to the hospital.
Yeah.
You have to be there 24 hours a day for these people.
Yeah.
But then they learn the local language. It's inevitable with time.
Well,
Maybe not.
Some do more than others. So there's two questions here that are kind of related, and I think one more has to do with how your environments are organized and kind of what the teaching model is. Like, is it 50-50 between English and Spanish, or if not, you know, how do you give priority to the two languages? How's that organized in your school?
Well, we were very clear from the start that it was, we wanted it to be an immersion program for 1 to 6 year olds. And then to become bilingual from 6 to 12. So what we have now is in the infant community, right now, actually, there is one person that's not from Spain, but the other 2 people are from Spain, but they speak good enough English to be able to run the infant community in English. Then in Children's House, I have one English speaker, one fluent English speaker, at least. And one, I've got 2 fluent English speakers. And the other I have, well, they're both fluent really, but one is from Spain. One's a local member of staff. Then in elementary, we have the English speaking guide and either a Spanish speaking co-guide or a Spanish speaking assistant. And that's how we've got it set up at the moment.
Someone else asks, what is your experience regarding potential differences between a profile for a starter school, like, I guess, setting up a new classroom in a newish school versus a more maintenance or maintainer guide?
So what would I look for in those 2 different roles?
Would you have different expectations about the candidates if it was in those 2 situations? Or
I would definitely ask questions related to setting up an environment if a candidate was going to be expected to set up an environment. But I think almost they themselves kind of sort themselves out. If somebody's not interested in setting up an environment, as soon as you tell them they're going to be doing that, they're going to be gone. So
Right. Yeah, I agree. And how do you support your new hires to reach a sense of ownership?
in the class in the school.
Mhm.
Well, I think that I try to be honest and um about what everybody's role in the school. We're all authentic people, so people feel that they can come to us and tell us about any difficulties or problems they might be having. Like I said, I try and set them up with a mentor. We normally, with regular staff, we have one-to-one, what we call a one-to-one meeting a month. With new staff, I have two, and just more check-ins in general to see how they're doing. And that, what I mentioned before, the letting them know that I'm going to be patient, that I know that they're settling in, that I don't expect them to do their best work from day one, it's impossible. That let's prioritize and think what you need to do well first, which is normally connect with the children first. Don't worry if your record keeping scrappy, don't worry if just don't worry about that at first, and also be a bridge between them and the parents until they feel confident enough to build those relationships.
So someone wrote a comment saying, thank you for being such a supportive employer.
Well, I hope all my staff would agree.
And our colleague Alexandra from Austria said there's a well-known German musician said, if you're putting a band together and you have to choose between a good musician and a good friend, take the good friend.
Oh, yeah.
It will work out somehow.
Yeah. I think one thing that I always try and make sure is that the people I employ are genuine people with big hearts. And I think that makes everybody feel good when they come here as well. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening. And I'm happy to help. Like I said, right back then, I had the help of my father, but I know that lots of people don't have that kind of help when they're starting out. So do reach out. There are a lot of support networks in Montessori now. If you just look for them, you can find them. You can find people to help you.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. Now, as we always do, as our tradition is, we're going to have our mentee moment. We ask you to type in what your aha moment was from today's presentation. So obviously appreciation for Lucy and how thoughtful and kind she is and how seriously she takes her role as an employer and looking out for the people who she's considering. And someone else appreciated the suggestion of making an interview sheet so you can kind of grade the response of each candidate, and then makes it easier. The need to recruit people with big hearts, so true. Employing local people who speak the second language is an easier way to find long-term staff. Flexibility in the hiring process. Sending questions to applicants before the interview. Reusing space for various programs. So I guess that was Lucy's when, offering someone part-time in one role, part-time in another, so they can have a full-time job. Very clear job descriptions. Your very caring employment approach, no doubt helps to retain staff. Having a mentor for the starter phase is also appreciated. So yes, I think that what I'm capturing here is that people really appreciated your thoughtful and kind approach, Lucy. hiring and supporting
Mm.
the staff as they integrate into your school and hopefully then stay with you for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to be as thoughtful and kind with the staff as we are with the children, if possible.
Yep, absolutely. Well, thank you, Lucy, again for sharing this experience. And yeah, I think people have gotten, they've really benefited from it.
It was a pleasure. Thank you, everybody.
Yes, thank you. And now I think we'll just show you our schedule for the talks now that we're getting back in after our break, we're getting back into a regular schedule. The next 3 talks coming up will be from Children's House Guides, who will be sharing different experiences that they've had. And then our last talk will be from our other Lucy on the team, who will be sharing with us. I think the focus will be her experience and thoughts on creating materials for second language learners. So that will be something to look forward to. And as I mentioned before, I'm already scheduling for the fall. So we'll be sharing those with you before June. So I'll just thank everyone who came and thank Lucy Welsted again for sharing with us all of her insights that she's gathered over the years. And we'll see you again at our next community conversation.